Daniel's basically in exile with a few other people that are like feeling like we were. Does anybody else?
Right.
Is there anybody else out here like us in this situation?
Right.
And then in Daniel 10, he's praying and believing and hoping that there's going to be this breakthrough. And it's like 21 days in, and this angel shows up. It's like, oh, I've not been slow. Actually, the moment that your knees hit the ground, I was given the marching orders, but I got caught up in a war in the cosmos for 21 days. And finally, the archangel had to step in, and now I'm here to help you. And I felt like that's where we were at. Like there was this raging spiritual war in the heavenly realm that we couldn't even see. And it was manifesting itself in the natural all around as people were filled with anxiety and hurt. And they, everybody was kind of like feeling transition in their heart. And they're like, do I need to hit the reset button? What is God doing? And then like, it's almost like when you have a brain freeze and then that brain freeze ends. And then like 3 minutes later, you forget that you had a brain freeze and you get another one.
Right.
That's what you're saying. Like, how can we make sure that we don't go back into like this crazy cosmic war by giving rights to spiritual beings and things in our culture that we don't need to? I think part of the reason why we were able to see victory, I think part of the reason why God's hand was on Donald Trump on July, 13th, whenever he got shot. Was it 17th? Whenever the bullet hit his ear. I feel like it was a miracle of God, and the hand of God was on him. I think that was because the church prayed.
Right.
I felt like they felt lied to and gaslit during COVID. I felt like they felt like lied to and gaslit about what was happening with Biden. I felt like they felt the pressure of persecution coming on them. You're hearing about in other governmental jurisdictions, people having to turn in sermons and you can't put a Bible verse on a billboard. And all of a sudden you're like, we can't teach what we believe in schools. And it's not okay to pray with a kid in school. But if you're in California, you can, as a teacher, give gender affirming care to a kindergartner that thinks they're transitioning. But yet any sort of ideology that's rooted in scripture, we're not allowed to have. And so I think Christians were like feeling like we're way out here in the minority. What's going to happen? Brain freeze, brain freeze, brain freeze. Oh, God's still with us. And so where we're at, I think it needs to be a place in a posture of humility. Like that has to be where we go, right?
Yeah. I think, ultimately, I echo the sentiment of like the last 4 years led the church to a place where, especially the last 6 months, like we both do itinerary, I travel around the world, I preach. Everywhere I would go, people were just like, I feel swirly. I feel like I am going through some of the greatest attack that I've ever gone through in my life. I would say the last like 4 months of my life, and many of the people I know, it was like bewildering attacks. Not the greatest attacks in my life, to be honest with you, but intense. Like things felt intense. And everywhere I would go, like every church, every place, it was like, it's so intense. It's so intense. It's so intense. Everybody was feeling that spiritual climate manifesting. And here, the concern that I have is that now exactly what you're saying is like, okay, now do we go, we won, and now we become apathetic? Do we realize that like the battle's not over? Like we still haven't seen revival in our nation the way that we want to see it. We still haven't seen reformation to the way that we want to see it. The systemic problems that were there 2 weeks ago are still there. There is still, I get asked all the time because I work in some nations. I love working with the persecuted church. And so I work in places where there's real persecution. What I mean by that is like it's illegal to be a Christian, or you're being beaten, or you're being, imprisoned, you're dying for your faith. And so I get asked all the time, like, are we being persecuted in America? And I'm like, okay, first off, persecution is not disagreement. So if you're just going, people are mad at me because I voted for Trump, okay, that's not persecution. Or go read my Instagram. Like people are saying terrible things, or you get emails all the time for your podcast. Like, okay, I don't consider any of that persecution, honestly. But I would say we're taking steps in the direction where if we don't take a stand, we could end up there. I have a friend in California who was a teacher who got in trouble because a student asked for prayer and she prayed for the student and she didn't tell the parents. And so in the school that she's in, she was disciplined for not telling the parents that she prayed for the student, but she legally, if that same child came to her and wanted a sex change and was born a woman and decided she wanted to be a man, she would get in trouble if she told the parents that this girl wants to go by he instead of she. So like that type of thinking is so warped.
Right.
It's so distorted. It's so deceived. It's so ungodly. It's so far from truth, right? And so as we come into this election, I'm celebrating, I'm thankful, I'm grateful that we saw what we wanted, but I'm still looking at our society going, we have systemic issues that need to be changed. And now it's like, okay, you won a battle, but we haven't won the war yet. Like there is more to be fighting for in our nation and believing God for, and mainly a spiritual awakening, right? That the dead hearts would encounter a real God and be awakened to who he is, to Jesus, right? So yeah, I think those are my concerns right now as we kind of pivot into like, okay, he's going to be inaugurated January 20th, right? And this is going to start a new, everybody's saying new era in our nation and in our world. And what's the church going to do now? If we become apathetic, we won nothing. We won nothing. But if we use this to encourage us to believe God more than we ever have before, and to see this as mercy, then maybe we could really go somewhere spiritually in our nation.